Hello, everyone. My name is Carolina, and I am representing Arkbound Foundation, a charity working to widen access to literature and improve diversity within publishing. Today, we have with us Fazeela Mubarak, who has written a chapter for an upcoming Arkbound book, Climate Adaptation, coming out this October 25th. Fazeela is an accountant by profession, but has for the last 8 years been involved in various environmental causes and is currently community engagement lead at the Kenyan Environmental Action Network. She has contributed to Care for the Wild Kenya, where she became aware of the importance of community conservation, and she was twice elected to the board of Friends of Nairobi National Park, where she was part of the Save Nairobi National Park campaign, among many other initiatives and projects related to environment and sustainability. She has also worked on major drought mitigation projects in Lamu, where the effects of climate breakdown have been felt in catastrophic ways. And her work has seen the implementation of sustainable projects that continue to benefit both wildlife and communities. Welcome, Fazeela. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So the first question that I would like to ask you is about your personal journey that led to your current work in drought mitigation and ultimately to writing this chapter for the book.
Yeah, well, I started out, there was a elephant poaching crisis in 2012. And I just kept on seeing these pictures, in the media about how elephants were just being killed for their ivory. So I looked for a way in how I can volunteer and be a part, to help the wildlife in my country. So I looked for organizations that would take me in, and Care for the Wild Kenya, they agreed to take me in as a volunteer. So I used to accompany the project officer, who used to handle some of the projects in the Savo ecosystem. And that's when I realized the importance of community-based conservation. And as I went, over the years, I noticed that the droughts would get longer, and this would increase, the conflicts, because the wildlife will go out of the protected areas into villages looking for water. And this would mean, destruction of farms, maybe injuries to people as well. So it just started becoming more frequent, and it was unprecedented. And the bulk of it was, when in 2017 there was a really bad drought in the mainland of Lamu. And when we got there to the ground, it was just huge numbers of hippos and wildlife that were dying out because of the drought.
So you, in your work in Kenya, the effects of climate change have been felt really strongly already, maybe much more than other parts of the world. What were the changes that you saw in these places that struck you the most, that impressed you the most?
It was quite a bit, and it was very emotional as well, because it wasn't just wildlife that was dying, it was people who are being affected. And these are like people who live in rural areas. They have the least amount of contribution of carbon emissions. And you have somebody who the most the most carbon emissions I would have is probably once in a month go to the main town, even that on a public vehicle, and not even to get medicine when it's really, really essential. But here we are, in this area, the farm's been destroyed because the wildlife went out of the protected areas into the farms looking for water. And maybe that farm is the only way that they sustain themselves for the whole year. So they're counting on that farm for their food. Any extra will be sold for medicine, for school fees, to buy clothes for their children. But here you have somebody's produce for the whole year just gone like that in just a few minutes.
Yes, it's interesting that you would mention that, because my next question is really about the conflict of wildlife and humans. Because you mentioned also in your chapter that in normal circumstances, local populations and wildlife tend to find a certain balance. And I would like to ask you all the ways that climate change affects this balance. So is it just farm destruction, or are there any other kinds of visible effects?
So what's happening right now is that the droughts are becoming more and more prolonged. And in the area where I used to volunteer more frequently, that's in the Savo ecosystem, normally when the rains come in, you have this, natural water holes that are filled in naturally. You have a river that's flowing close by. But what happens is, if the dry season gets prolonged, then all the water holes dry up. And when the water holes dry up, like elephants, we have huge, massive elephants in Savo. And, just, the community also lives not far from these areas. So what happens is, the animals start going out, and sometimes, they encounter people, they encounter school children, and it can be really disastrous. You can have, people being killed by wildlife, or, wildlife being killed, by people, because you really have to understand that, this is somebody's farm, this is their livelihood. If they don't have it, if they don't get that, then, there's no way of them to survive. There've also been incidences of, school children, they cannot go to school because, they have to walk quite a distance to get to school. But can you imagine, you're trying to go to school, but there's a herd of elephants on your way? That's like, very daunting. So there's no way you can go, so you have to go back to at home and miss out on school. Or, you're going to school and there's a buffalo, a huge male buffalo on your way. So there's no way you could go. It's also really affecting girls as well, and women, because a lot of the communities, they have livestock, and because the water holes are drying out, it means they have to trek further and further to get water. And sometimes what happens is the girls, maybe they go earlier in the day before school to get the water, come back and then go to school. But now, because they have to keep on going, further away and further away in search of water, so they're missing out on, school. They're endangering their lives, because, sometimes they have to travel through dense forests and, wildernesses. You don't know what's lurking behind the bushes. It could be wildlife, it could be, militias. So it's having an effect on even education as well.
So you would say that women and girls are a group that's particularly at risk compared to maybe other groups?
Yeah, I would say, women, girls, even children as well, because even for boys, a lot of time we tend to overlook boys. But the thing is, I'm really up for girl empowerment and everything, but sadly, we're also neglecting our boys, especially in rural areas, and, in these areas of, the climate crisis. We don't want to we don't have a situation where we're just looking out for only girls, and then, we'll have a generation where the girls have gone so further ahead, but the boys have been left behind. So it's something that we should definitely consider as well.
Do you think that the general public is aware of this situation, or is it mostly the activists, like the little bubble of activists and the local populations that see it happening?
Um, I'll just tell you from my personal experience. It was when we've been doing these issues, it's been extremely difficult, Carolina, to get attention of the media. We tried to call so many organizations. We called some of the biggest names in media. We send them pictures, it was all ignored. And sometimes I tend to think it's because, we're people of color, so our stories tend to be overlooked and not being given the same attention. Because even if you see at the climate crisis right now, like the way the Germany floods have been covered, it's been given massive coverage. But there have been floods in India as well. There's flooding in Nigeria as well. But how many people actually know about that? So it was a real challenge then, just to get our stories out. Even the local media, it was really difficult to get the attention. And when we did get a story out, it was just one tiny column on the 5th page of the thing of a newspaper. And who's going to read that? It's not really going to draw the attention that the crisis requires.
So I guess that would be one of the main challenges surrounding this type of work, just getting the word out. What would you say are the other challenges that you are finding surrounding this type of work that you are doing?
We had challenges with fundraising because we were relying on donations as well. But that was even really difficult. Even applying for grants, we really tried our best to do it, but then it was just rejects upon rejects. And I think at least now I would say, because it's 4 years now, there's a bit more awareness on the climate change issues. But then it was like, it wasn't something that was considered very urgent at that time. But I'm hopeful things are changing. So, and we have no shortage of NGOs in Kenya. We have a lot of NGOs in Kenya who do around animal welfare, around wildlife, and we try to approach them to get help, but it was very difficult to do that. So we just had to keep relying on our friends for donations, and just use our social media, even though we didn't have much of a following then, but just to push on for that.
Okay, so we've sort of covered the part about the hardships. So I would maybe drive this now in a little bit more of a positive note. So I would like to ask you, what were the solutions that you put in place? What were the adaptations that you really used in your work in the field?
I would say, like, mostly I'd give up the hard work for the rangers, and the perseverance of the community as well, because in spite of so much hardship, they were just positive and looking at the best way. And doing this work, you get so emotionally drained, and they would just call you and they'd say, no, don't worry, better days are coming, it's going to rain eventually. So what we did is we started working with the community. We started seeing how we can replenish the water holes, even if it was just taking water trucks and putting them in, and doing it in a way that was as efficient as possible, using the very limited donations that we had, as efficiently as possible. And that really helped. And then eventually we managed to like get a donors excuse me, to come and we drilled boreholes with the help of the local community over there. So that and then we were able to get another donation for solar panels so that there'd be continuous flow of water. And just within a few months after the rains came, the whole place just changed. And even when the dry season came, the water was still over there, and the community took the initiative to look after even the wildlife. Can you imagine the same wildlife that went and destroyed their crops, that injured members of their community? They were over there looking after the wildlife. So if any poachers came in, they would try and chase them away or report them to the authorities. And that was like a really plus thing for us.
Yes, it's good that you are mentioning the community, because I also wanted to ask you, since one of the things that is very visible in the chapter is how you've got the community involved. So in a general sense, how important do you think it is to get the community involved in this adaptation and conservation efforts?
I think they should be at the core of any climate mitigation things, because they're the ones who are suffering it all. They're the ones who have, for generations lived in that area. They know when it's going to rain. They know all the different weather patterns, and they're the ones who tell you, what's not happening. Like they can sense when there's a particular flower that's flowering, and then they can tell you, oh, it's going to rain in the next few days. Or they can hear certain animals like frogs or something, and they'll tell you, this is what's happening. Or that they can see a herd of maybe impala that used to come every season, but they're not coming right now, maybe because they've died off. So they're the ones who can really help us with the solutions and mitigation efforts as well. So maybe they can tell you, we can do a water wall here because there's a lot of wildlife, so that when it rains, when it floods, then we can actually like use that water for the dry season.
So one of the things that you had to resort to at a certain point were bringing in loads of water and replenishing dams. So this is was a successful operation, but it's mostly temporary. So what would you say are the most effective long-term interventions for this type of drought situation?
Yeah, well, we did what we had to do, because at that time it was very crucial that we saved the wildlife that was really suffering, and also to stop the wildlife from going on inside in people's farms. So climate change is already happening. Things are already really bad on the ground. So what we did is we're trying to look at like solutions where we can have water and more resources. So like we drilled boreholes that are still benefiting the community today. Another one is digging up water holes, or like creating like small dams where when it rains or there's flooding, all that water can be collected and then it can be used over the dry season. Those are some of the lasting solutions that we can think of. Another way is that engaging the government and its planning procedures, especially when it comes to rural areas. Going basically like really grassroots and starting from them, seeing what we can do. Can we plant drought-resistant crops? You know, are there any other ways that we can repurpose water? So there's other things that we are hoping to work with, so that it's there in the policy.
Oh, I heard that you mentioned the need to connect with the government and work with them. Is this something that you find that is somewhat easy to do, or is it a challenge to get to speak to the local government and get them to engage in your work as well?
Um, as long as you engage with them, they're very open to hearing, especially when it comes to county governments at the grassroots level, because it is their communities as well, and they know the people as well. So it is not really that difficult talking to them. They're open to suggestions, and they're willing to work on a way forward.
That's heartening to hear.
Yeah, normally people just say things that the government's not doing this, they're not doing that. But I would say they are really, really trying. They're also trying to have conferences and trying to bring youth together, though it can be really difficult, especially during this time when most of the things are online. There are like marginal voices that are being left out again. But I would say like the effort is there, and I think if we work together, then we can really make a change. But it's just the thing that really breaks my heart is that we are one of the countries that have some of the least carbon emissions, and yet we're the forefront of it. And you have, big rich countries, who are racing to go to space. And here we are, trying to, just get food. Communities are just trying to get food on their table.
So you have, it's very challenging when you see this type of inequality, especially when it's balanced with the lack of awareness that we were speaking of a while ago.
Yeah.
However, do you think also that it's easy to take the lessons that you've learned here to other places, maybe other locations in the world that are facing the same issues? Do you think that this could be used as a model to help them overcome challenges? Are you able to connect with others in other parts of the world doing this type of work as well and learn from them, exchange experiences?
Yeah. So I've been trying my best to connect with other activists, and just like, because it can be very draining and sometimes you can feel very alone. So it's heartening that we get to share the experiences, and you actually get to know how much of the problems that you're facing are quite similar. And then we try to see what we can do, if we can amplify our voices, and just work together and see how we can have our voices heard, especially during like the big conferences that are coming, like the COP26.
Okay, yes. I was going to ask you next about your hopes, if you have hopes for the COP conference coming this November.
Yeah, I just hope it's not one of the the other COPs that we have had. We really need to push the accelerator to do real action, because things are just getting way out of hand. And like the way we've seen with the recent floods, no one is immune from it. We are all together in this climate disaster, the crisis that's unfolding right now. And we all have to take responsibility and do our best to stop fossil fuels. We have to look at greening the economy, making whatever we consume more sustainable.
And regarding this book, what do you hope that the Climate Adaptations book will achieve?
I hope it will get out our story over there. And what I'm really hoping to send out a message of just not despair, because it's not always doom and gloom. I'm also trying to send out a message of hope and inspiration, that we can actually work this together, and we can help make a change.
Okay, so one final question is, if people were to take just one message from your chapter, what would you like that message to be?
That there's always hope. There's always hope.
Thank you, Fazeela, for sharing all of this with us and for sharing so much of your amazing and inspiring work. And for all of those who are watching, if you are interested in learning more, you can always read Fazeela's chapter in the upcoming book. The pre-order is already open. You can find a link in the description, as well as links to some of the most recent projects that Fazeela is involved in. Thank you so much again, Fazeela, for being here with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.